With the NFL draft merely weeks away, this one particular prospect continues to have strong connections to the Detroit Lions. We're going to talk about it in this episode, folks, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Lions fans, and welcome back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving on in. So, here's the thing, folks. I've said it once before, I'll say it again now, and I will probably continue to say it until the draft itself has actually come and gone. But, for virtually the entire offseason, the Lions have long been associated with some of the top cornerback players that have been on the market, whether it has been in terms of potential trades, whether it has been in terms of potential free agents, or potential draft prospects that are upcoming. And the point of the matter is that there is good reason why the Lions have been associated, why the Lions have been connected to these cornerbacks. It's because everybody and their brother knows that cornerback is a position that the Lions are looking to upgrade. It is a position that the Lions are desperately feeling has to be upgraded if they want to make that next step, if they want to make a Super Bowl push. Because if we take a look at how the Lions did last year, the offense did extremely well. The rush defense did very well. The pass rush defense, as far as getting sacks and as far as getting pressures, did okay. But what did not do very well was the ability for cornerbacks to stop or slow down opposing passing offenses. And that comes down primarily to the defensive backcourt, and in this case, primarily to the cornerbacks. Because when it comes to safety, I would argue that the Lions have one of the best safety rooms in the entirety of the NFL. We have Brian Branch. We have Kirby Joseph. We have Ife Melifonwu. The Lions have some pretty good damn safeties. What we don't have is a lot of good cornerbacks, at least not going into the offseason. Currently, this offseason, the Lions have made 3 moves as far as cornerbacks. 2 additions, one subtraction, pardon me. The 2 additions, obviously the Lions that have made, we already know quite well. The Lions went out and they signed former Raiders cornerback Amik Robertson, and then they made a trade with the Buccaneers to grab Carlton Davis. And then, obviously, we know they released Cameron Sutton due to the incident that is surrounding him at the current moment. Now, like I was saying, with the release of Cameron Sutton, the Lions, as Dan Campbell has stated, they are still looking to find yet another player to fill the void that was left by Sutton's, immediate dismissal. This again has spurred more context. It has spurred more talk about the Lions making another move to add either a veteran player or another cornerback that has, been available to them. Such names that have been presented have been, again, the former Dolphins cornerback Xavier Howard. I know some people have stated that he's already signed with a team, but every time I look, I can't find it. So I'm pretty confident someone's pulling an April Fool's joke. Then there's guys like Stephon Gilmore. I know a lot of people are talking about the potential of trading for Patrick Surtain, and also it has been presented in the past about trading for Greg Newsome. These are just some of the names that some people have presented. However, though, I've said it before and I will say it yet again. I simply just do not believe that Brad Holmes is going to make any of these moves for, again, a multitude of reasons. And the reason why is, again, first and foremost, the first wave of free agency is already over with. And at this point, most of the moves that have already happened, they're now done. Teams have now moved their focus. They've moved all of their attention off of potentially going out and signing free agents. Now they're moving into draft preparation. They're moving into draft prospects. They're moving into getting draft profiles up to date. They're not worried about free agents because once the draft is over, then you're going to start having the second wave of free agency, because pretty much what at this point all GMs, all teams already know is everybody else is doing the same thing as far as draft preparation. Those free agents, for the most part, are going to still be there once the draft is done. And once the draft is done, teams will have a much better idea of where their teams are standing at, where their rosters are at, and who they should potentially go after. Reason number 2. Second, let's keep in line with the fact that the NFL draft, that's what I was just talking about. Like I've said at the very beginning of this, the NFL draft is literally only 3.5 weeks away, folk. So again, that's where teams are spending all of their time and energy on. They're not worried about free agents at this point. They want to get every ounce of information that they possibly can about these draft prospects. They want to gather as much data as possible to figure out who they should get, who they should not get, and how to make up their draft boards. Again, they're not worried about free agents. And then third, to kind of bring this into the Detroit Lions realm of things, Holmes and Campbell have already stated that they got all but one of the top targets in free agency that they were looking for. And again, to kind of keep this in tandem with the whole talk about a trade, the Lions have already made a trade this offseason. So again, I sincerely doubt that Holmes is going to try and pull the trigger on another one. I just don't really see it happening because, again, when you're talking about trades in the offseason, that usually requires you giving up draft capital. And I'm pretty confident that Brad Holmes does not want to give up more draft capital. So with all of these reasons that I've presented, with all of the logic that I have analyzed, weighed, and presented to you, again, it would seem highly illogical that the Lions would go into this draft by making yet another move, whether it's a free agency acquisition or whether it is a draft pick being traded. I think that what the Lions are going to do is they're going to go into the draft and they're going to say, okay, here's who we have. This is what we're going to get from the draft. Then we'll make any appropriate moves afterwards. And so far, when you think about it, now that teams are starting to do pro day appearances, now they're starting to go out to these, to the showings that the schools are having, the Lions have definitely shown a very keen interest in one of said players that I have talked about before, and that I think the Lions could find immediate use for. And that is KoolAid McKinstry. And again, when you take a look at KoolAid, KoolAid is arguably one of the top prospects in the draft this year and has largely been connected to the Detroit Lions over the course of this offseason, again, for a multitude of reasons. First and foremost, let's go back, if you will, to March. Again, when you take a look at the fact that when Brad Holmes, the Detroit Lions, and all the rest of the other guys were at the freaking combine and they were watching these guys do their drills and whatever, KoolAid couldn't perform because of the fact he had a Jones fracture in his foot. Again, for those that don't know what a Jones fracture is, all it is just a fracture of a pinky toe. It's not a very serious injury, but it is an injury all the same. An injury that, I will remind everybody, KoolAid himself did not know that he had, or at least that's what he said. Point of the matter is that when Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell went to the combine, one of the meetings that they had, which they're only allowed a select amount of meetings with certain prospects, certain players, one of those meetings was with KoolAid. Now here's what's more particularly interesting about this. Out of all the meetings that the Lions could have, they only had meetings with 2 cornerbacks. Only 2. That brings me back to another point. We know that Brad Holmes has said that he is very, very picky. He is very particular about cornerbacks. He's kind of like, I don't know if somebody said it or if he said it, he's kind of like a snob, if you will, when it comes to cornerbacks, which there's nothing wrong with that. I would prefer you to get the right cornerback than not. So for me, the fact that the Lions, out of all the meetings that they had with these players at the Combine, there was only 2 of them that were cornerbacks, and one of those 2 was KoolAid McKinstry. That right there speaks volumes to me. That right there is a huge piece of information that I think some Lions fans are overlooking. So that's number 1. Number 2, let's also consider the fact of Brad Holmes' draft record. Over the last 2 drafts, Brad Holmes has drafted 3 separate players from Alabama, from the Crimson Tide. Those guys being Jamison Williams, Brian Branch, and Jahmyr Gibbs. I would say it's fair to say that Holmes has an affinity for players that come from Alabama. And again, let's think about this. KoolAid is considered one of the top prospects, not only in the draft, but also one of the best prospects that's coming out of Alabama this year. And again, let's just consider Alabama's track record. Alabama has had also an affinity for churning out really good prospects over the years. So it's like, hey, there's a reason why Brad Holmes keeps going back to that well. And I don't think there's any reason to doubt that Brad Holmes is going to do it for a fourth time. So that's reason number 2. And then again, I've said this before, and I'm just going to simply say this. The third reason that I can think of that, the Lions will definitely, in my opinion, like this whole thing, because again, what I'm talking about here is that the Lions are projected to have KoolAid. Well, again, we just have to understand the situation for what it is. KoolAid has a name that literally is perfect for the Lions marketing team. It's perfect for the market that he's going to potentially when we're having this conversation. What have the Lions fans been told that they've been doing for years? Drinking the KoolAid. That we've drank the KoolAid for years. I'm sorry. It's just too perfect of a marketing tactic to get a player who goes by the name of KoolAid. It's just perfect for the Lions. So it's like, okay, he's a cornerback. He's one of the best cornerbacks that's in the NFL draft this year. The Lions have shown a clear interest in him, and he has a name that works with the Lions' overall history. Yeah, I could say that's a pretty good reason why the Lions should be interested in him. Not necessarily from a talent perspective, not necessarily from a scheme fit, but from a marketing fit, you'd have to be pretty hard-pressed to find somebody else that could fit with the Detroit Lions from that perspective. Which then brings me in to my next set of reasons. Because I truly believe that the Lions are zeroing in on KoolAid and they're trying to get more information because they want to make sure that he's the right guy. And we've seen the Lions do this over the last couple of years with guys that they are particularly interested in. Whether it has been with Aiden Hutchinson, whether it has been Jack Campbell, whether it has been any of the prospects that they've met. They usually will meet them at the combine. They'll bring them in for pro day. They'll go to their pro days. They'll bring them in for top 30 visits, whatever the case might be. So when we think about it, what have the Lions done with KoolAid? Well, like I said, the Lions have already formally met with KoolAid at the Combine. And again, they're limited to only a certain number of team players, or a certain number of players to do those interviews. So that's number 1. But second, we also know that Brad Holmes personally was in attendance at the Alabama Pro Day. Now, I'm not going to say that Brad Holmes was specifically there for KoolAid. That's just a little bit crazy. But let's understand something here. What's Brad Holmes' job? Brad Holmes' job is to scout all talent. That's what he's doing. But I will say this. I can personally guarantee you, to at least a certain extent, he was definitely there to watch KoolAid. Because obviously, like I said, the Lions met him at the Combine. But we know that he didn't participate in any of the drills at the Combine because of said Jones fracture. But at his pro day, KoolAid performed, and not only did he perform, he actually performed rather well despite having that fracture. It was reported that with having a Jones fracture in his foot, he ran a 4.47 40-yard dash. Now, I'm just going to say this. Most human beings, you give them a broken bone, a fractured bone, or something that is going to be painful, they are not going out and running and performing football drills. So what does this information tell me? It tells me that he is a perfect fit for the Lions. Number 1, for his ability to go out there and run a 4.47 with a fractured toe, that right there proves his athleticism. But the second thing it also does is it proves his grittiness. It proves his toughness. And if there's one thing we know that Brad Holmes and especially Dan Campbell want out of their players are gritty, tough players. You'd be hard-pressed to see somebody that's going out running drills with a fracture in their foot and still being able to put on a show. So for me, it's like, dude, I can't see any reason why the Lions wouldn't be interested in him from that perspective. And then, to again revisit the point I brought up earlier, the Lions have drafted 3 players from Alabama. And that's with just in the last 2 drafts, J-Mo, Gibbs, and Branch. So, again, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Lions make KoolAid the 4th one. Because, again, what's one thing that I can definitely say about Alabama? Even though I'm not a fan of Alabama, I never have been, the one thing you know about Alabama is that they have a championship pedigree when it comes to the NCAA. And for me, I think that's something that Brad Holmes likes. He wants guys that want to win. He wants guys that know how to win. And when you go to Alabama, you have to have that mindset, especially when Nick Saban was there. And since this is Nick Saban's last draft class since he retired, I believe that Holmes will make KoolAid a priority because it's like, listen, this is a guy that fills a spot that we need to have filled. He's also a guy that has the ability to be tough, to be gritty. He has athleticism. He has all the makings of what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell are looking for. And then finally, I always love to put up stats to kind of prove my point here, but I'm going to put this out there just to be quite evidently about this. First and foremost, in the 3 years that KoolAid was at Alabama, this is what he produced. He gave up a 47.5 reception rate to wide receivers. Not even 50%, folks. That's damn impressive, especially at Alabama. That's number one. Number two, he only gave up 584 reception yards in all 3 years. That's also pretty damn impressive. He had a 7.6 missed tackle percentage rate out of all 3 years. For a cornerback, that is downright just awesome. And then he only gave up 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions with a 63.3 passer rating. So, okay, from a statistical perspective, the dude is lights freaking out. That's what you want your cornerbacks to do. You want them to be great in coverage, you want them not to miss tackles, and you want to make them to be shut down cornerbacks, or as close to it as you can possibly get. That is exactly what KoolAid provides. But then you have the pedigree perspective that I talked about earlier. He's coming from Alabama. Alabama is known for producing championships. It is known for having a high-quality football program while Nick Saban was there. I can't speak for anything that's going to happen now. But then on top of that, that pro day that the Lions went to, and then KoolAid's out there running drills with a fractured toe, and he's doing just fine, that right there is going to speak volumes to Dan Campbell. It's going to speak volumes to Brad Holmes because they want guys that are both athletic and dynamic, but also tough and gritty. So for me, it's like I cannot think, or you would be hard-pressed to find a better prospect that fills what the Lions are needing in a position, but at the same time that fits what Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, and the Lions are wanting out of their prospects. That's why I keep touting as hard as I have for KoolAid, because it's like, listen, the man is a great prospect as far as a talent. But also, when you are doing drills with a fractured foot and you're doing just fine, and you have the statistics to back it up and the pedigree on top of that, please, by all means, try to argue with me that KoolAid is not the perfect prospect for the Lions. Like, that for me is just you can't argue with it. You just simply can't. But anyway, folks, I'm going to end this episode. I think I've made my point. So I'm just going to say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage you all to do one of these 3 things. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If by chance you subscribed in the past, you forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and not had a chance to do so, again, I want to highly encourage y'all to please subscribe to the channel. But I also want to encourage y'all to do so, and also make sure you hit that bell notification icon at the bottom, so that way you never miss any more content that I push out. Again, subscription numbers, they're going up. But we want to make sure that you guys also turn on the notification icon, so that way as soon as I push something out, you guys can jump right back into the streams. I also want to encourage y'all to share this content with your Lions friends and family members. Share here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere you can. The more we can share it with anybody and everybody, the greater the channel spreads, the greater the channel grows. And with that being said to everybody, I again just want to say thank you all for being such a wonderful group of subscribers. You guys are awesome. You guys are amazing. You guys are just wonderful as a community. And I'm thankful for each and every one of y'all. I hope y'all have something today that makes you happy, makes you smile. I hope y'all enjoyed the content. And with that being said, God bless. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.